The data chip was the size of a fingernail. Ambassador Velkara turned it over 3 times before she understood what she was holding. It had been left on the negotiation table, not presented, not announced, not transmitted through proper diplomatic channels, simply left there, the way a human might leave a coin on a countertop. The chip's surface was warm. That was the part that bothered her most. Warm, as though it had just been removed from a living hand. She scanned it with her secondary optical receptor and saw only 2 words encoded in Galactic Standard. Our answer, no signature. No rank identifier, no species classification stamp. Just those 2 words and a file size that made her translation matrix pause for 0.4 seconds before processing, which, for a Velkari diplomatic intelligence system, meant the file was almost incomprehensibly large. She did not play it immediately. She stood in the empty chamber where, 6 hours ago, the Interstellar Governance Council had delivered humanity its ultimatum, and she tried to remember the last time a species had left something rather than transmitted it. She could not. Whatever humans had recorded on this chip, they had done it before the ultimatum was delivered. They had known. 17 hours earlier, the chamber had been full. Every seat occupied, every screen active, every species represented, from the methane-breathing Karathi delegates sealed in their amber environmental suits to the towering 4-armed Druvathi council members who had to fold themselves nearly in half to fit through the standard-width doorways. 41 civilizations, ranging from 300 to 11,000 years of spacefaring history, gathered in one room. And at the far end of the table, 3 humans. Velkara had been watching them since before the session formally opened. It was a professional habit she developed over 200 years of diplomatic service, read the delegates before reading the agenda. The Druvathi always telegraphed their real position through the position of their secondary arms. The Charathi betrayed discomfort through micro-oscillations in their suit pressure membranes. The Titani could have maintained false emotional states for more than 4 minutes without neurological fatigue causing eye tint fluctuation. Humans were so far the only species she had encountered whose body language she consistently misread. The 3 seated at humanity's position were young by galactic standards. The one in the center, she had reviewed his credentials 3 times and still found the rank incongruous, was listed as Senior Diplomatic Attaché Marcus Webb. He was 41 years old. By Volcari standards, that was an infant. By the standards of civilizations that measured diplomatic careers in centuries, it was almost insulting. He was reading something on a small flat device, not the session agenda, something else. He turned a page, turned another. His face was calm in the specific way that faces become calm when their owner has decided something irrevocable. The second human, a woman named Dr. Sarai Okafor, was watching the other delegates arrive. But not the way most observers watched, cataloging, assessing. She was watching the doors. Every time one opened, her eyes moved to it with a precision that struck Velkara as less diplomatic and more like something else. Something she couldn't name. The third human hadn't looked up once. The session opened at the 14th hour of Standard Cycle. High Arbiter Dross Kalin, a Tithani whose species had held the council chair for 600 years, activated the chamber's formal protocols with a gesture of its third limb and began speaking immediately. The council has reviewed humanity's petition for expanded territorial recognition. The petition has been denied. A pause that wasn't really a pause, more like a period placed deliberately, a full stop embedded in the air itself. Furthermore, the Council has reviewed humanity's unilateral colonization of 4 systems within the contested expansion boundary. This constitutes a violation of Council Statute 7 Rho. Humanity will therefore be required to withdraw from all 4 systems within 90 rotations and remit administrative control to the Council Boundary Commission. Webb looked up from his reading. Just once, briefly, the way a person looks up when they hear a noise they expected to hear. Additionally, Droskalen continued, the Council requires a formal acknowledgement of statute violation, signed by the human head of government and transmitted via Council-verified channel within 72 hours. Failure to comply will be interpreted as an act of jurisdictional hostility, triggering Article 12 response protocols. Velkara knew what Article 12 meant. Everyone in the room knew. It meant economic quarantine, travel restriction, and the quiet withdrawal of 17 technological exchange agreements that humanity's infrastructure had become, over the past 60 years, quietly dependent upon. It meant in practical terms that Earth would be isolated, not destroyed, not threatened with war, simply disconnected. Left to manage alone without access to the medical technologies they'd integrated into their population health systems, without the faster-than-light navigation data they licensed from council members, without the 17 trade agreements that currently kept 3 of their colony worlds economically viable. It was not a death sentence. It was something more precise than that. It was the Council demonstrating with surgical clarity that humanity existed inside a system it did not control and that the system could simply close around them. The Council, Droskalen finished, will receive humanity's formal reply at the next session. You have until sunrise of the next standard cycle. Webb set down his device. He looked at Droskalen for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Thank you for your clarity." That was all. No argument, no counter-proposal, no request for deliberation time. He stood, nodded to the chamber, and the 3 humans left. Velkara had watched them go and felt, for the first time in 2 centuries of diplomatic work, that she had fundamentally misread a room. She ran the behavioral analysis twice on the walk back to her quarters. Both times, the same result. The human delegation's biometric signatures, the subtle indicators she could read even across species lines, respiration rate, micromuscle engagement, the particular way bipedal species distribute weight when they're under stress, showed no significant elevation. Not before the session, not during the ultimatum, not after. They had not been surprised, and they had not been frightened. Velkara. Her aide, a young Velkari named Shiss, fell into step beside her. "Did you observe the human response?" "I observed it. The Council considers the matter settled. The compliance window is 72 hours. They have no leverage to resist." "Yes," she said. "You don't sound confident." She thought about Webb, reading his small device, already calm before anyone had said a word. She thought about the woman watching doors. "Pull everything we have on Marcus Webb," she said. "Not his official credentials, everything else." Shiss hesitated. "That's an unusual request for a closed matter." "The matter isn't closed." She didn't look at her aide. "I don't know what it is yet, but it isn't closed." The file on Webb was not what she expected. Most senior diplomatic attaches came from political science backgrounds, from career bureaucracies, from the slow, credentialed ascent of people who had spent their lives learning to navigate institutional systems. Webb had spent 12 years in something called the United Earth Emergency Infrastructure Corps before transferring to diplomatic service. She had to query the translation twice. Emergency infrastructure. She searched the Human Historical Archive for context and found herself reading about a series of crises spanning a 20-year period. A global supply chain failure that had nearly collapsed food distribution on 3 continents. A coordinated cyber attack on the electrical grid of Earth's northern hemisphere. A cascading failure in the orbital debris management system that had threatened to render low orbit unusable for a generation. Webb had been in the room for all 3, not as a senior figure, as the coordinator responsible for the response architecture. The person who figured out what resources were available, what was truly lost and could not be recovered, and what could be salvaged into something that still functioned even after the original system had failed. Velkara sat with that information for a long time. He hadn't come from diplomacy. He had come from learning how to keep things running after they should have stopped. And Dr. Sarai Okafor, she discovered when she pulled the second file, the woman watching doors, was not a political scientist either. She held doctorates in xenobiological systems analysis and something with no direct Valkyrie translation, a field humans called catastrophic decision theory, the study of how complex systems behave when they are placed under conditions that, by conventional modeling, should produce total failure. What they don't do and what they sometimes do instead. "Shis," Volkara said quietly, "request access to the Council's communication intercept logs for the past 48 hours. Specifically, any transmissions from or to the human delegation. All transmissions are logged in compliance with Council, I know. Just get them." The logs came back 12 minutes later. She scanned them carefully. Then she scanned them again. In the 48 hours leading up to the session, the human delegation had sent exactly 3 messages. One to Earth's Department of External Affairs, flagged as a routine status report. One to the Human Colony Administration on Kepler Boundary 4, listed as a supply logistics confirmation. One to an address she didn't recognize, 11 hours before the session began, containing nothing but a timestamp and a single alphanumeric code. She ran the unrecognized address. It resolved to a human commercial freight routing hub. Not a government server, not a diplomatic relay, a freight company. A freight company. She set the file down and looked at the ceiling of her quarters, which was bare and pale, and offered no answers. "They're not going to comply," she said aloud to no one. Shis looked at her. "The Article 12 protocols will. They already know about Article 12. She stood. They knew before they walked in. Sarayo Gaffor's entire academic career is the study of systems that continue to function after they should fail. Webb spent 12 years engineering exactly that. They were not surprised by the ultimatum because they have already modeled it. The chip, the warm chip, left on the table after they'd gone. Our answer, recorded before the ultimatum, submitted after it. Warm, as though just removed from a living hand. She needed to understand what was on that file. She needed to understand it before the Council played it at the formal reply session in 11 hours. Because she was increasingly certain that whatever humans had recorded, it wasn't an apology. She played it alone, in the small briefing room adjacent to her quarters, with the door sealed and no aide present. The file opened not with video but with a single static image, a map of the 4 contested systems. And then, before any voice spoke, a secondary layer rendered over the map, not borders, not territorial markers, but infrastructure diagrams, relay stations, medical distribution nodes, emergency response hubs, agricultural processing facilities, all of them built in the 4 contested systems by humans. Over 6 years, the voice that spoke was not Webb's. It belonged to Dr. Okafor. This is a record of the Boundary System Stabilization Project, begun 6 years and 4 months ago, following the Kepler boundary refugee crisis produced by the Theresi corridor collapse. Her voice was calm and precise, the voice of someone presenting evidence at a scientific conference. These 4 systems contained approximately 400,000 displaced persons from 7 Council-recognized species following the trade corridor failure. Council resettlement response was projected at 12 to 19 years. Human emergency infrastructure deployment began within 90 days. The map shifted. Live data feeds. Velcora watched, her secondary optical receptor working double time as the scale of what she was seeing assembled itself. Medical centers. Running. Feeding approximately 200,000 people who had, 6 years ago, been stateless refugees with no institutional support and a 19-year wait for official resettlement. Schools. Agricultural systems adapted for 3 different atmospheric profiles. Orbital relay infrastructure that the system's economies now routed critical communications through. And in Okafor's voice again, the Council's Article 12 protocol will withdraw 17 technology agreements from Earth. We would like the Council to be aware of the effect this withdrawal will have on infrastructure we have built for Council-protected populations. A new data layer. Each of the 17 technologies that Article 12 would cut, mapped not to Earth's own systems, but to the facilities in those 4 contested systems, the medical equipment running on licensed drive technology, the atmospheric processors using Council-patented molecular systems, the communication relays using faster-than-light signal architecture. If the Council executed Article 12, it wouldn't just isolate Earth. It would also shut down the life support for 400,000 refugees from Council member species. Volcara's hand was very still on the surface of the table. "We are not asking the Council to reverse its decision," Okafor continued. "We are providing this information as a matter of procedural transparency so that all parties understand the full effect of the protocol they have chosen to activate. Earth will manage the resulting difficulties. We have experience with difficult situations." Silence. Then, one more thing. A final file attached at the end, small, labeled only with a date 6 years in the past. She opened it. It was a Council internal planning document. A projection model from the Boundary Commission, dated 14 months before the Theresi corridor collapse. It had predicted the collapse. It had estimated the refugee crisis that would result. It had calculated the resettlement burden. And it had recommended at the bottom of the document that the Council develop an emergency infrastructure response protocol. The recommendation had been tabled, no action taken. 4 months later, the corridor collapsed exactly as predicted. And 90 days after that, human ships had arrived in the boundary systems with prefabricated medical units and atmospheric processors and 6 years of intention that no one in this chamber had thought to ask about. They had not colonized those systems. They had responded to a crisis the Council had predicted and declined to address. Volcara sat in the sealed briefing room for a long time after the file ended. She was thinking about a dated chip left warm on a table. She was thinking about a man reading, already calm, before anyone had spoken. She was thinking about a woman watching doors, not because she was afraid, but because she was noting the exits and the people near them and calculating, always calculating, what the situation truly was beneath what the situation appeared to be. She had thought the humans came to the Council to negotiate. They had come to show the Council what it had already done. In the answer on the chip, recorded before the ultimatum, before the session, before Dross Kalen had said a single word, was not a response to the Council's demand. It was the Council's own document, its own prediction, its own declined responsibility, time-stamped and preserved, attached at the end of 6 years of evidence that someone else had done what the Council had chosen not to do. The demand that humanity kneel had already been answered before it was spoken. Of course they weren't surprised. She picked up her communication device. "Shiz, get me the other Council ambassadors. All of them who will receive me in the next 4 hours." A pause. "And find out where Marcus Webb is right now." Webb was in the station's lower observation deck. She found him alone, standing at the viewport, looking at the slow rotation of the planet below. He didn't turn when she entered. He must have heard the door, must have seen her reflection in the glass, but he kept his eyes on the planet with the ease of someone who had been expecting this visit and had decided in advance to let her speak first. She walked to the viewport and stood beside him. "How long ago," she said, "did you know the Council was going to issue the ultimatum?" 14 months, he said. "Give or take, before you began the infrastructure build." "We began the infrastructure build 6 years ago. We knew 14 months ago what the Council's response to that build would eventually be." The planet turned. Below them, somewhere on its surface, 400,000 people were alive because of facilities that the Council had just threatened to deactivate. "The commission document," she said. "The prediction report. How did you obtain it?" A Velkari researcher filed it through Open Academic Registry. She was trying to draw attention to it. No one responded to her submission. He glanced sideways. "Except us." Velkara closed her eyes briefly. "Of course." Of course it had been a Volcari researcher, her own species filing into the academic void. You understand, she said carefully, that the Council will interpret this as manipulation, as engineering a crisis to weaponize humanitarian leverage. We built hospitals, Webb said. We built food systems. We built schools. The people in those 4 systems are alive and healthy and have been for years. I understand how the Council will frame it. I want to understand whether the Council actually believes that framing or whether they are going to use it because the alternative is admitting what the document shows. She said nothing for a moment. The planet kept turning. The Council will not simply capitulate, she said. There are 41 civilizations with institutional investment in the existing power structure. Even if individual ambassadors agree with you privately, I'm not asking them to agree with me privately. His voice was quiet and very even. The file has already been transmitted to academic servers, press archives, independent diplomatic record keepers. The document exists in the public record now. The Council can respond to that or not respond to it. Either way, the record exists. She looked at him. You didn't come here for a negotiation. No. You came here to make the Council's own prediction public, to show, with 6 years of evidence, that you had done what they refused to do, and to attach that evidence to their ultimatum, so that any institutional response they chose would occur in a context where the full history was visible. He turned from the viewport. His face was not triumphant. It was tired, in the specific way that people become tired when they have been patient for a very long time. We needed to be clear about what we actually are, he said. Not a threat, not a power that needs to be managed. An answer to a question the Council asked and then didn't want to deal with. And if the Council still proceeds with Article 12? The thing she had not expected was the way he answered. Not with defiance, not with strategic confidence, but with something that on a Volcari face she would have identified as grief. Then a lot of people will suffer, he said. And we'll stay, and we'll keep them alive as long as we can, and the record will be there for anyone who wants to read it. He paused. We're very patient, Ambassador. It's one of the things about us that I don't think you've accounted for yet. She thought about that on the walk back to her quarters. She thought about it while she contacted the other ambassadors. She thought about it while the Karathi ambassador told her, with unusual directness, that his species had 700,000 citizens in the contested systems, not refugees, citizens, using human-built infrastructure every day. She thought about it while the Drevathi ambassador, characteristically blunt, said, "The commission document makes this very simple. Either the Council explains why it declined to act on a prediction it accepted as accurate, or it explains why it would prefer to deactivate the response someone else built in its absence. Neither explanation is comfortable." She thought about it at the formal reply session, which did not go the way anyone had planned. Dross Kalin had prepared a formal Council response to what it anticipated would be humanity's submitted compliance documentation. Instead, the session opened with the release of the file, already transmitted, already public, already spreading through academic networks faster than any diplomatic protocol could track. 3 Council members had already received constituent communications before the session began. The Charathi delegates' environmental suits were cycling their pressure membranes with the rapid rhythm that indicated not distress, but urgency, the subtle signal that meant they had information they needed to act on. The transmitted file, Dross Kalin said, and the pause before the next word was not a period. It was a room recalibrating. Has been received and is under Council review. Webb said nothing. He was reading his device again. Review took 6 hours. It should have taken 30 seconds for anyone paying attention to understand what the file contained, but political systems do not move at the speed of comprehension. They move at the speed of institutional self-protection, which means they move slowly when the evidence is clear and quickly when the alternative is worse. The alternative was worse. Volcara spent those 6 hours talking to ambassadors. Not arguing, not lobbying, talking carefully in the way that someone with 200 years of diplomatic experience talks when the facts are already on the table and the question is only whether the table will be acknowledged. What she discovered in those conversations was that the fear had already shifted. 3 days ago, before the session, before the file, before the ultimatum, the fear in this station had been the quiet ambient anxiety of established powers aware that a younger species was growing faster than expected. A management problem, a jurisdictional complication, the kind of problem that Article 12 protocols existed specifically to address. Now, sitting in conference rooms with ambassadors from 41 civilizations, she felt a different quality of fear. Not the fear of something growing too fast, the fear of something that had been growing in a direction no one had been watching. The fear of a species that had looked at a prediction of humanitarian catastrophe, looked at the institutional body declining to address it, and said nothing, filed nothing, complained through no channel, and simply gone and done it themselves. For 6 years, in silence. They were patient, the Tithani secondary ambassador said to her in a private corridor, his eye tint cycling through rapid variations that she recognized as the specific color range associated with recalibration, with updating a model that had been wrong. We assumed they were building a presence, positioning for influence. We thought we understood the strategy. And now? Volcara asked. Now I don't know what the strategy is, and that is more frightening. He paused. An opponent pursuing known goals can be modeled. An opponent who does things for reasons you cannot predict. Who builds hospitals in a crisis you predicted and ignored and tells no one, and then attaches the evidence to the response to an ultimatum you issued. I don't have a framework for that. I don't think they were pursuing a strategy, Volcara said slowly, feeling the truth of it as she said it. I think they saw a problem and solved it. And then when the consequences of their solution became a political problem, they explained what they had done and why. And the reason that doesn't fit your framework is that it isn't a political strategy at all. Then, what is it? She didn't answer immediately. She was thinking about Webb's face at the viewport, the tiredness in it, the specific quality of grief underneath the calm. I think it's a personality trait, she said at last. The Council did not execute Article 12. It did not formally rescind the ultimatum either. What it did was what institutional bodies do when the only available moves are all bad. It formed a committee. A Boundary Systems Review Commission, tasked with reassessing the status of the 4 contested systems in light of, and here the language was careful, precise, bureaucratically elegant, significant pre-existing humanitarian infrastructure development. It was not a victory in any form that the Council would have recognized as such. No acknowledgement of fault, no formal reversal, no apology for the ultimatum itself. But the medical centers kept running. The schools stayed open. The 400,000 people in the boundary systems woke up the next morning in the same buildings they had woken up in the morning before, and the morning before that for 6 years. Volcara was outside the session chamber when it ended. Webb came through the door with Okafor beside him and the unnamed third human who still hadn't looked up during the session. She stepped forward. Ambassador Webb. He stopped. The committee will take months, she said. Possibly longer. The Council is not designed to move quickly. I know. They may still find a way to characterize this as a jurisdictional violation. The politics are not resolved. I know that too. She looked at him. She thought about everything she had read in his file. The grid failure, the supply chain collapse, the orbital debris crisis. 12 years of staying in broken systems, long enough to find the pieces that still worked. I want to ask you something directly, she said, and I want a direct answer. He waited. Is this what humans intend to keep doing? Finding problems the Council declines to address and simply responding to them? Without asking permission? Without filing for authorization? He considered the question for a moment, not performing consideration, actually doing it. "We'll ask," he said. "We'll always ask first. But if the answer is no and people are going to die while we wait for the committee, then yes, that's what we'll keep doing. Even knowing the consequences?" "The consequences," he said, "are already in the record." She watched them walk away down the corridor. Okafor said something to Webb in a low voice. He shook his head slightly. The third human finally looked up at Velkara, briefly, with an expression she still could not read, and then looked forward again. She stood in the corridor for a long time after they were gone. The chip was still in her pocket. She'd carried it since she picked it up from the table. She turned it over in her fingers, the way she'd done when she first found it, feeling the weight of it, the smallness of it. An object the size of a fingernail, carrying 6 years of evidence that a species had looked at the galaxy's worst management failure, looked at 41 civilizations declining to respond, and had simply, quietly, without announcement, without authorization, without any expectation of credit, gone and fixed it. And when the galaxy finally noticed and demanded they explain themselves, they had handed over the full record of everything they'd done and everything the Council had chosen not to do, and stood there, patient and tired, and waited to be understood. She thought about the Tithani ambassador's words. "I don't have a framework for that." She thought about Webb. "We're very patient, Ambassador. It's one of the things about us that I don't think you've accounted for yet." She thought about the commission document, the prediction filed and tabled, the recommendation made and declined, the gap between what the galaxy knew was coming and what the galaxy had chosen to do about it, and humanity reading that document, not lobbying, not protesting, not filing counterclaims or requesting emergency sessions or broadcasting the injustice of it, just going, building things, keeping people alive, waiting for the question to be asked, because they were patient, because they had 12 years of grid failures and supply chain collapses and orbital debris crises, and what those 12 years had taught Marcus Webb, what they had carved into him, into Sarai Okafor, into every human who had ever looked at a broken system and stayed inside it long enough to find what still worked, was a truth that no civilization with 100 years of stability could easily learn, that the only thing more powerful than refusing to solve a problem is quietly solving it anyway, without a Persian, without acknowledgement, without asking whether solvable. Because surviving isn't the question humans ask first. They ask what needs to be done, and then they do it, and then they wait, for as long as it takes. 3 months later, Delcara filed her personal assessment of the Boundary Systems incident. It was not an official council document. It was a private record intended for the Velkari Diplomatic Academy's historical archive to be read by the analysts and ambassadors of the future who would need to understand what had happened in that chamber and what it meant. She spent a long time on the final paragraph. She rewrote it 4 times. The final version read, "We demanded that humanity kneel, and we expected the response of a species that feared us. We received instead the response of a species that had already spent 6 years doing what we had predicted needed to be done and declined to do ourselves. The correct lesson of the boundary incident is not that humanity is strategically sophisticated or politically dangerous or institutionally subversive. The correct lesson is simpler and considerably more unsettling. Humanity does not appear to require our permission to respond to suffering. They do not appear to require our acknowledgement, our authorization, or our approval. They require only the knowledge that something needs doing. This is not a posture. It is not a strategy. The most dangerous and most difficult truth for any established power to absorb is the one confirmed by 6 years of silent construction in 4 abandoned systems. They were not waiting for us to act. They were never waiting for us. They are never waiting for anyone. Whatever we ask of them, they have already begun to answer. Whatever future we decline to build, they have already started building. The gap between what we are willing to do and what they will simply go ahead and do, that gap is not political leverage. It is not a threat. It is the most honest possible measure of the difference between a civilization that has never truly had to be afraid and a species that has been afraid so many times for so long, through so many failures and crises and collapses, that fear is no longer the thing that decides their actions. What decides their actions is the next problem, and they are already working on it. We should find out what it is. Why,